All right, guys, what's going on? Welcome back to the Everything College Football Podcast. Today, me and Nick here, we're doing our preview and prediction for a marquee matchup in Week 0, ranked Big 12 contest going down in Dublin between Kansas State and Iowa State. Wildcats, 3.5-point favorites, 49.5 to the total, 12 p.m. Eastern Time on ESPN. Getting things started with the Kansas State offense. This was a group last year that was able to put up 31 points per game. They were very good on the ground with 215 rushing yards per contest. But now with DJ Giddens going to the NFL, it's going to be more so on the shoulders of Avery Johnson, second-year starting quarterback for KSU, who we really expect to ascend. This is a guy that had a lot of hype, of course, coming to KSU, and I think he certainly has a lot of heights he can still reach. At times last year, though, especially in conference play, you just saw him play with a lack of confidence and a lack of command in this unit. Johnson last year completed 58% in conference play. Now that he's going to have to be more on point, you certainly wonder what kind of aspect of this offense is really going to change. And I think that's going to be, more balance. That's what they're going to optimally look for. And I think Avery's going to be big in that. He's going to be looking at guys like Jace Brown, who's a great dual threat guy. Outside of him and Garrett Oakley, though, who's going to step up as pass catcher versus a very good secondary, Iowa State. We'll talk about their defense here shortly. They run a great three-safety shell look. And I think ISU, though, last year uncharacteristically allowed a lot of explosive plays at a much higher clip than we're accustomed to seeing. And I think Kansas State can certainly look to expose that, Nick. I definitely think they still have a very touted running back room, but they don't have that workhorse anymore in Giddens. So Johnson's going to have to look to make more plays with his legs, and he's also going to have to be more consistent as a thrower. Where do you think his confidence level is going into year 2?
I think Avery Johnson's a phenomenal quarterback, but he does have to show some signs of improvement as the second year as a full-time starter. I like what Avery Johnson can do. The product out of Wichita, Kansas is a really good athlete, 6'3", about 200 pounds. He's a really good runner, and he's a really solid passer, but there were times last year where he was just making mistakes, and it wasn't really looking like he was super comfortable and confident in the pocket. 58% comp rate's probably a little too low, 2,700 yards passing on 372 attempts, so 7.3 yards per attempt, 25 touchdowns to 10 picks, also had 605 yards and 7 scores on the ground, 5.4 yards per attempt on the ground for him. You got to cut down on the turnovers. That's a big issue for Avery Johnson. The turnover plagued him a lot last year. I think that's a big concern if you're a Kansas State fan is, can he cut down on the turnovers? Can he be smarter at protecting the ball this year? I think that's something you want to keep an eye on. The passing group he has here is a revamped group mostly. A lot of different transfers coming in. Some guys that are going to have to step up. Which one of these names on this list of transfers is going to step up? Jerome Tibbs, Jaron Brandley, are these guys going to step up? Caleb Medford, is one of these guys going to step up and be the top asset for a team that's gunning for a Big 12 title here? I think Avery Johnson has the tools to be a top quarterback in this conference. I think he'll have a great day over in Ireland, but he's got to be confident. He's going to be comfortable in the pocket. If he makes a mistake early on, it could cause some problems for Kansas State.
They also have guys like, a 5-star incoming tight end, Lincoln Kier. Like you said, Jerron Bradley, I think that's a guy who's a pretty good player. Caleb Medford's not a bad addition either. So I think they're a little bit deeper at receiver this year in anticipation of having to look to throw the football a little bit more. But I think they're still going to have a very optimal rushing attack that I think has a big advantage in this contest. Iowa State last year was pretty bad against the run. Of course, we'll dissect that a little bit later. But this is a game where they're going to be breaking in new starters on the offensive line, one for KSU that's typically very good. You're going to want to keep an eye on how the tackles do going up against a weak pass rush. But in terms of blocking communication, that's something that you want to make sure is on point. And Dylan Edwards, this is a guy who I think is going to do a phenomenal job. In terms of size, kind of reminds you of Deuce Vaughn, right? 5'9", 167. Highly explosive player that can make plays in the receiving game as well. You've seen that in the bowl game as he got the start against Rutgers where he had 200 rushing on less than 20 attempts. He's not a guy that's typically going to give you near 20 carries per game, though, so I think you're going to be looking at guys like Joe Jackson to be kind of the power back. Antonio Martin, the transfer as well. I think you're going to see a bit of a by-committee approach. Edwards is obviously going to play a lot of snaps, but they need to keep him healthy throughout the year, Nick, as a thinner back. So I think Joe Jackson's going to get a long leash here. And again, Johnson, you're going to see his legs involved significantly in the red zone and, of course, on those second and third and shorts as well. This run game, I think they're going to do great this year, Nick. I'm excited to see how Edwards does. Explosiveness is the name of the game when you're talking about him.
This is a phenomenal rushing attack last year. Over 6 yards per attempt on the ground, 21 rushing touchdowns, 2,800 yards on the season. Competent offense has scored 30.8 points per game last year. You lose your top back, but I like what they plug in. I agree with you. I feel confident what they're plugging in here. I think Dylan Edwards can be that number one back. Obviously, I want to protect him a little bit. He, had some interesting moments at Colorado, struggled at times as well, though, but I think he's a guy that profiles to be a star back in this conference and on this team. I think he fits in really well. I think Joe Jackson's a really good number 2 who could certainly be solid for this team when it's all said and done. Antonio Martin Jr. was a transfer they added as well, who they think could be solid. He comes from Southeastern Louisiana at the FCS level who could be a decent impact player on the ground. Now, I don't know if they're going to rush for 6 yards per attempt this year, but they get 5.2, 5.3 yards per attempt, and this will be a high flying offense. Look for a similar number like that in this game against Iowa State. This was a defense that struggled against the run last year, 5.35 yards per attempt given up on the ground. So look for a number of that kind of range that Kansas State wants to be in to get this offense fully humming week 0 in Ireland.
Now you move to the Iowa State offense. They're also going to get back, second-year starting quarterback that we think is highly impressive, Rocco Becht. This guy's phenomenal. I loved watching him last year. I thought this guy was a gamer. This guy would do anything to win, and you saw him have great numbers, 3,500 yards through the air, almost 40 total touchdowns. This is a guy who's highly impressive, one of the more underrated guys in college football. But I think the load is going to be much more on his shoulders compared to Avery Johnson, as he's got to be mistake-free, losing the top two receivers, Jalen Knoll and Jaden Higgins, who are now gone to the Houston Texans. Both of them got drafted there. I think that's beautiful. Those guys get to stay together. Those guys commanded a significant amount of targets, though, Nick, and we knew that was going to be the case with them. 80-plus receptions each. That's a significant amount of production to lose. And Iowa State's not exactly a team that has a lot of success recruiting when it comes to, being able to stockpile weapons. They go to the portal. Chase Sewell, who's a little bit more productive than Xavier Townsend. Those are going to be your two guys now you're hoping to get a lot out of. Daniel Jackson, a veteran of the program, Eli Green as well, guys who really haven't did a whole lot. I think the game, at least for this contest, and I don't know if they can do this the entire year, is, target the tight ends. Gabe Burkle ended up being the third leading pass catcher last year for them. Benjamin Brahmer, this guy was really good back in 2023, with 28 recs for 352 yards as a freshman. A little bit quieter last year as he battled health, but I think those two tight ends you're going to be looking to have, more personnel sets to get them both on the field and target them. I'm just not sure if Chase Sewell and Xavier Townsend are going to be all that special for Iowa State. Sewell did have about 700 yards and 3 touchdowns, 20 yards per catch last year for ECU, so I think his production is something to make you smile a little bit. But I'm significantly concerned for this passing attack, Nick. It's the first time in 3 years those two players, Higgins and Knoll, will not be there, and it could lead to some massive issues.
I think Iowa State has a better quarterback in Rocco Becht, but I think they have the worst weapons. So I think that's an interesting balance there. And I think Avery Johnson having better weapons will ultimately help him in the long run in this game. I think what the quarterback play at Iowa State has been pretty solid recently. About 60% comp rate last year for their quarterback, 3,500 yards passing, 25 touchdowns, 9 picks, 318 yards on the ground, and 8 scores. Similar stats to Avery Johnson, not exactly the same, but roughly similar in some of those, certainly more yards for the Iowa State quarterback. I just think this passing attack will be a little bit weaker this year. They had a strong passing attack last year at times, right? 5.89 yards per play. Some of that was carried by the fact that they were able to throw the ball a little bit better. They had 4.35 rushing attempts, or yards per attempt on the ground last year. So they certainly improved that. Had 25 touchdowns to 10 picks last year, as I stated there with their quarterback. So pretty good numbers there. 3,500 yards, I think, is a really solid starting point for this offense. I think the weapons, like you said there, I agree. The weapons are a little concerning. I think Townsend could break out and be a solid player for this team when it's all said and done. But what will his adjustment look like coming over from UCF? Chase Sewell was really good for East Carolina last year, but can he make that jump up in the higher level of competition and be a good player for this team at the wide receiver Z position? I think it's certainly possible, but how could it look early on? I think they're going to have to run the ball effectively here if they're going to want to be a dominant factor in this game. They're going to target the tight ends a lot, I think, if they want to have success here, which makes a ton of sense. Go on those short intermediate routes to target your tight end, get some opportunities to make some big plays there. This passing attack for Iowa State, I just don't know if I trust it enough to compete in this game against a Kansas State defense that showed a lot of strengths last year. Losing your top 2 wide receivers in Nolan Higgins really could be a big-time problem that could burn the Cyclones.
Now you look at the rushing attack for Iowa State, a group that at times was really impressive, but I thought for the most part in conference play, they honestly underwhelmed for the most part. I mean, you only had like 2-3 games of 200-plus yards. Most of that came early on in the year. Down the stretch, they were just not that great, despite being incredibly impressive with the backfield. Carson Hansen, this guy's a great downhill runner, a lot of power there. Abu Sama, more of a versatile back of his ability to slash, his speed, his cutting. His numbers, they were good, but I thought he was going to be a breakout player of the year in the conference. 587 and 2 score. Sama's incredibly talented. Those guys are going to be getting the bulk of the load. I think Dylan Lee, redshirt freshman, he could probably get involved as well. They coach the running backs here. I've been saying it for years under Matt Campbell incredibly well. So I think another year is going to pay wonders for those guys. They're going to get a lot of touches. And I think that's going to do away with, the concerns they might have at pass catcher. Kansas State, though, it's not the easiest run defense to really make waves on. The offensive line, I thought, was less than desirable, especially in pass blocking last year for Iowa State. They do have some veterans that are returning. And, of course, the pass protection that wasn't all that ideal. I think right tackle Tyler Miller is probably going to be your top player here up front. So they're going to look to run the football, Nick. I don't think they'll be as successful as their opposition, but this is certainly an area for them where they can thrive in.
In my opinion, they were disappointing running the ball last year. 4.35 yards per attempt is probably a little bit below what you were hoping for. He had 27 rushing touchdowns on the ground, which is a solid number, but 2,200 yards total. You were hoping probably for a little bit more if you're an Iowa State fan. I like what they returned here. I think Sama could certainly be a big breakout for this team. Carson Hansen is a solid back that can certainly lead the way and be a good number one. Dylan Lee for the depth chart could be solid as well. I think mistake-free football and running the ball effectively will be the best way for Iowa State to win and compete in this game over in Ireland. They're going to have to find a way to have a really strong opportunity on a really strong morning and afternoon on the ground. I think they're going to have to find a way to be productive, get good first down yardage here, like 5-6 yards on first down, set yourself up in position running the ball, and that could really go a long way for this Iowa State offense.
Now we'll move to the Kansas State defense. Speaking of how they did against the run last year, it was respectable. Nothing great. They allowed 120 plus rushing in 7 straight games to end the year, so they're allowing a little bit of penetration. But they never allowed more than 200 yards. So they played well collectively, not well enough to make you feel overly confident versus this tougher attack. But I think with the returns of guys like Cody Stufflebean, you have a nose tackle in Damian Ilayo, who I think is phenomenal. Uso Siamalo, I mean, those guys are full of size. This is a 3-3-5, of course, so not as many bodies. So the defensive line last year, I thought they underperformed for the most part, but they do return veterans. The biggest reason I'm so confident they're going to look well in this game is because the linebackers are exceptional, especially versus the run. Austin Romaine is elite. This guy is one of the top backers in the country. Desmond Purnell, a redshirt senior, has been in the program forever. Rex Van Wy, he played a good bit last season, and they also picked up Gabe Powers via the portal. They're going to slot in, I think, with ease. These linebackers are going to be tremendous, and with the veterans they have up front, who I expect to be better, Nick, it's possible they overwhelm Iowa State in this game, especially with offensive tackles that struggled last year in terms of run blocking and pass protection. I think this is an edge they might be licking their chops for.
Yeah, I absolutely love the front part of this 3-3-5 defense here for Kansas State. I think this is a really strong unit. You talked about Gabe Powers, comes over from Ohio State. Didn't do a whole lot there, but he was a high upside recruit that I think could be a big impact player in a lower stakes program like Kansas State. I think he'll be really fit in perfectly there. Stufflebean will be really good coming off the edge. Austin Romaine is a great leader there at middle linebacker. I think he's a guy that can quarterback your defense and be a great asset. Nearly 100 tackles last year for him, plus 4 QB hurries, so he gets some pressure when necessary. I like what they have there. They were good against the run last year, right? 3.56 yards per attempt. Some of that skewed from some of the worst opponents they played, certainly, but they were still solid. Only gave up 15 touchdowns on the ground last year. So I think that's a good starting point when you look at what this defense can do. I like what they can do against the run. I think this is a good matchup advantage for them. The defensive line certainly has to hold up and be strong here, but I think the matchup advantage slightly is leaning towards the Wildcats here. I think this run defense can be really solid. They should have a good day here.
They only had 1 sack last year in this matchup, though, a game that Kansas State had lost. But they did well against the run, though. They only gave up 187 in that game, so they were pushing the limits. But for the most part, that was a matchup that Iowa State was doing a little bit better in. You look at the secondary. There's a lot that's going to be happening with these new wide receivers, and you're also breaking in new corners. So, who's this going to favor? I don't expect these receivers to create separation on a consistent basis. So I think if you just avoid double moves or penalties, I think the pass attack that was very explosive last year is not going to be possessing that same threat this year. And last year in that game, they limited back to 13 of 35 for 137, and they avoided big pass plays. The safeties really shined in that one, led by VJ Payne. You also have Colby McAllister, I think is really good. Gunnar Maldonado, a guy coming over from Arizona, I think is going to be a standout in this secondary. So, I mean, that's impressive, Nick. If you can, do what you did last year against this passing attack on the road with those weapons, I'm thinking you're going to dominate them in this regard when it comes to this matchup. And I know we hate to compare, 24 to 25, but sometimes you got to go based off of that, especially early on in the season. And that's what I'm doing here, Nick. I'm looking at this and I'm going, Beck is going to struggle through the air significantly.
Yeah, not a bad comparison at all. Not a bad point of reference. I like what the secondary has. I think Maldonado was a great add out of the portal. You highlighted him. I like what he can do a lot from Arizona. I think he's a big, high impact player. He had 81 total tackles in 2023. Had a bit of a down year last year, but he can still be a good player at free safety. Donovan McIntosh, I think could be solid at left cornerback. Zizon Rich, I think he's going to be a decent player when it's all said and done. The secondary, I like what they can do. They struggled at times last year, gave up just under 3,000 yards total on the season. 20 touchdowns to 10 interceptions, so 10 picks. Probably want to get that a little bit higher overall. They gave up 5.26 yards per play as a total defense, but I think the secondary returns enough assets here. It might be a little bit weaker than it was last year, but they dominated against a better passing attack that Iowa State had last year with their top two weapons. I would imagine they're going to play pretty strong here. I think they're going to have a decent day. They seem to have Iowa State's number in the passing attack potentially, and that could really be a huge advantage for Kansas State.
I moved to the Iowa State defense. This is a group that I thought underperformed last year, but they're still incredibly talented. Obviously, they're breaking in a lot of new starters. The run defense is going to be looking for redemption. This was a poor unit last year. 6 games of 200 plus yards. They got gashed often. They did hold up to well in this matchup last year. Only 144 allowed on the ground to KSU. So maybe more of an unknown. Iowa State also ranked 127th in 60-plus yard plays allowed last year. I was alluding to that earlier, where they were just more prone to allowing explosive plays, especially on the ground. A big reason for that was the linebacking group was as poor as it gets in this conference. They also had a lackluster pass rush to match that. Outside of Dom Orange, a D tackle, no one you can really point to in the front six to make plays. And of course, they don't use the portal a whole lot. They rely on development. And I think they're going to do that very well this year at points, especially with the return of Caleb Bacon, who I thought was going to be tremendous for them last year. Got hurt early on. That certainly led to a lot of weakness. But overall, it was a weak group. Will McLaughlin, Cooper Ebel, these guys were not good one bit. I think one thing that we alluded to for Iowa State in our preseason breakdown of them is that they have a boatload of experience at the linebacking group now, and the return of Bacon should help uplift them, Nick. I'm not expecting a standout performance in this one. Also, wouldn't be shocked if they look dynamite in this game either, Nick. So I'm hopeful for them season long to improve. This was a big weakness for them. In Iowa State, they did hit the portal, though, to pick up 3-4 guys on the defensive line. So that screams worry for me, and I think you're going to see that come to a full head in this one, where they're going to get dominated on the ground once again.
Yeah, they struggled against the run last year, 5.35 yards per attempt, gave up 19 rushing touchdowns last year. They had a bad year on the ground. The run defense just wasn't good enough for Iowa State last year. It's got to be better this year. Dom Orange, he was a really good player for them, but he's got to be a lot better. Zamir Hawk, that's a guy I'm highlighting as a potential player that could break out and be really good at nose tackle this year, but he's got to be better. Anaja Carnarl has got to be better as well on the two deep. He's got to be solid. They brought in some interesting pieces from the portal as well. A few, not too many. Markel Chapman's a guy they're hoping could be solid. Cannon Butler, that is. They're hoping he could be okay. Caleb Bacon, Will McLaughlin, Carson Willis. These guys all got to be better here this year. Bacon, he was injured last year, but if he's fully healthy, he could be solid. Will McLaughlin, he's got to be better. Got to clean up his tackles certainly this year. This run defense was just brutal, right? And this is a rushing attack for Kansas State that's not a bad unit at all. So I think even if they lost some of the talented players they had last year, they should still be a really good top-tier rushing attack in the conference. It could be a long day for Iowa State if they cannot stop the run and they keep putting their defense in tough positions where they keep giving Kansas State short field on second and third down. It may be a very long day for Iowa State if this run defense does not step up and play really good football here.
Now, if they can step up, on the other hand, it's going to put them in some very favorable situations. I think if Iowa State can generate penetration, keep runs between the tackles, they should do good, as it will put Johnson in long down and distances, which I think is phenomenal for this secondary. Again, they run this scheme better than anybody in the country under John Heacock. Last year, Brown got loose for a 65-yarder, and his speed could be a problem. Jace Brown, that is the Kansas State standout receiver. So it's not a given that they're just going to dominate against the pass, especially if they're not all that good against the run. But I'm certainly going to take the secondary over most in the country when given the opportunity. Guys like Jontez Williams, Jeremiah Cooper are two of the best in the country at their cornerback spots. They are breaking in some new safeties, though. They added a guy named Trey Bell in the portal to come fill a void as well. So I think you're looking at potential regression in the secondary. But again, the coaching is just so dominant here for the Cyclones. The scheme I trust so much. I don't think it's going to be a complete cakewalk, Nick. So if they do well against the run, it's going to be very interesting to see if they can take advantage of those successes.
If you're a Cyclones fan, you're probably sitting here saying, when are they going to say something positive for this team? Well, it's coming right now. We're going to talk about the secondary very positively. I love what the secondary can do. Last year, they were a phenomenal unit. When you look at the yards per attempt they gave up, which was 5.35, their total yards per play given up was 5.73, so really not giving up that much through the air to skew those numbers there. They gave up 300 less yards in the air than they gave up on the ground last year, gave up 18 touchdowns, had 15 interceptions, so nearly tied that ratio, which is very impressive to do. I like what they return. They bring back just about everyone except Trey Bell. They add out of the portal from Lindenwood. He was good at the FCS level. They're going to hope to slot him in at left cornerback and be really solid. Avery Johnson struggled sometimes, so maybe the secondary has an opportunity to make some big plays. The secondary for this team is going to be the biggest thing that could potentially bail out this Iowa State defense. If this secondary has a good day, they put Avery Johnson into some issues, give him headaches early on, force some turnovers. It could be a massive boost in bonus points for this defense. Jeremiah Cooper is a phenomenal player. Jontez Williams, I'm excited to see what he can do this year. I think he'll be really solid in this matchup. Him and Cooper together could be really solid. I love this secondary. It's an incredible unit. If you're looking for a big matchup advantage, certainly the secondary against Avery Johnson is a massive advantage for Iowa State.
They look at the tail of the tape, the team comparisons. I know earlier you said Beck was the better quarterback. I'm going to go even, though I think both those guys pretty much have the similar skill sets. Running back, I think both rooms are pretty equally as strong. Clear edges, though, at wide receiver, offensive line, D-line. I think linebacker is the clearest of the bunch, while secondary, the Cyclones are going to get. It's the only nod in their favor. The roster is really as wide as I'm suggesting here, Nick, or do you think that this is appropriate?
I think Beck is certainly a better quarterback. I'd like to give it to him at the quarterback position. I think running back is very even. That's a fair one. I do think when you look at the wide receiver, O line, D line, and linebacker, I can understand why Kansas State gets the nods there. Those are all just dominant units. But the secondary, I think, is the best individual unit of any of these teams on paper. I love what the Iowa State secondary can do. That's a clear win for me. I think this tail of tape does make a lot of sense.
Moving into the final thoughts and the prediction, starting with the keys to the game, I think for Kansas State, get the balance going on offense, set up easy throws for Avery. I think for the Cyclones, you want to, have that run defense show up holes. The wide receiver is going to need to step up early. Those are the biggest two question marks with them. Is your run defense going to show up this year? Who's going to be the playmakers at pass catcher? And I think this is a clear-cut, easy pick. I think Kansas State, they're going to cover, and they're going to start conference play 1-0. I just think top to bottom, they're going to be the better team for the most part of this season. I think there's less question marks for them, and I think there's better matchup advantages for them to take advantage of. So I think they're going to be able to run the football against this defense. I don't think the Iowa State offense will be all that great. I think they're going to struggle, especially in that first half. You never want to doubt Matt Campbell. I was saying that a lot last year because a lot of people really weren't talking about this team. They ended up almost competing. They almost made the playoffs last year. So Iowa State, they're going to be really good this year at some point. I think Kansas State, those a couple levels above them, and they should win this game if they can keep it clean. But if Iowa State shows up defending the run, then I think that's going to make this one a lot tougher, and that's going to cause Kansas State to really have to throw the football with more efficiency, and that's a question mark for them if you had to find one. So Kansas State to win for both of us. Nick, your final thoughts?
Yeah, I think Kansas State wins this game. I think they cover the spread as well. I think they run the ball effectively. That's their biggest way to kind of get this job done. Run the ball. Don't put the ball into harm's way. Don't make Avery Johnson make mistakes. This Iowa State secondary is lethal and will certainly torture you and put you in a headache if you give them the opportunity to do so. Run the ball effectively. Be smart. Get good gains on first down on the ground. Get Edwards involved in the rushing attack early. Make him comfortable and kind of make sure that you go into a groove here. Very exciting to have a top 25 matchup going over in Ireland, a conference battle. Top 25 matchup. I think that's really good for growing the game. This is the sixth time they're playing over there in the Aviva Stadium in Dublin. A fourth straight year in a row they're going back. The last couple of games outside of that Notre Dame Navy blowout in 2023, the 2022 matchup between Northwestern and Nebraska, last year's 2024 matchup between Georgia Tech and Florida State have both been very good games. I think this profiles to be another very strong game over there in Ireland. Should be a great fan support. I know the fans are going to be coming out in spades for Farmageddon, which is a kind of a fun rivalry, a great name there. Game day is going to be there. All the big theatrics for week 0. A good way to start off what is not a terrible week 0 slate. I think this is a very fun matchup. I think Kansas State gets the job done ultimately. I think they're just the better team on paper. But if you want to find a reason why Iowa State wins, they force some turnovers, get some good field position, and Rocco Beck has a very strong day under center for the Cyclones. A very intriguing game, but give me Kansas State plus the points to open up the college football season.
Great way to kick off our college football season, as always, in Dublin. A ranked matchup, one that's certainly going to be very important as the season looms. That's going to be it for today's episode. Make sure to like, comment, subscribe. See you next time.